He was an empire of suit and silence, until he was broken by a child's question. Are you lost? A cafe, a mysterious child and a glance from the past shake his certainties like an earthquake. As the world collapses, a truth explodes and makes him rethink everything he built. In the end, it isn't money that saves him. It's the love he almost lost forever. If this story interested you, subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Let's begin. The end of a decade-long sham marriage left Gabriel Davis in ruins. CEO of one of the country's most influential startups, he had built an armor of success, an imposing and cold image that the corporate world admired, but which isolated him from any human warmth. The divorce made public a few months ago became a media spectacle. Headlines speculated. Whispers in the company corridors dissected every detail, and everyone expected him, the strategic genius, to reorganize his personal life with the same efficiency with which he restructured a board of directors. But the truth was that Gabriel no longer knew who he was beneath that armor. For the first time in years, the silence of his penthouse in New York City haunted him. The void between one meeting and another, once filled with the ambition of future plans, now echoed with diffuse memories of choices he barely remembered making. The life he built seemed like a script written by someone else, a role he played with mastery, but which never truly belonged to him. The mirror reflected a stranger, a 40-year-old man with tired eyes and a fortune that couldn't fill the abyss in his chest. The decision to escape was impulsive, an act of rebellion against the very life he had created. On a long weekend, he did the unthinkable, turned off his corporate phone, declined 3 emergency meetings, and without telling anyone, hit the road. His destination was Charleston, South Carolina. He wasn't looking for beaches or parties. He sought anonymity. He wanted to get lost in a place where his name meant nothing, where his face wouldn't be recognized, where he could just be a man, and not CEO Gabriel Davis. The colonial town, with its cobblestone streets and historic mansions, promised a silent refuge, a labyrinth where he could hide from himself. He made no reservations, planned no itinerary. He just drove, guided by exhaustion and a visceral need to exit the stage. The rain began to fall in the mountains, fine and persistent, and when he finally parked near the historic center, the laden sky seemed a mirror of his soul. The salty, humid air smelled of liberation and melancholy. He walked aimlessly through the wet streets, the uneven cobblestones beneath his expensive shoes. The streetlights reflected in the puddles, creating a scene both beautiful and desolate. It was then that he spotted a small coffee shop, a warm, yellowish patch of light in the grey landscape. The windows were fogged with steam, promising shelter from the cold and rain. He needed coffee and a place to dry off. Nothing more. As he pushed the wooden door, a bell tinkled softly, announcing his arrival. The aroma of roasted beans and freshly baked bread enveloped him, a warm embrace that contrasted with the biting dampness outside. The place was cozy, with exposed brick walls, wooden shelves filled with books, and small intimate tables. The soft sound of bossa nova and the murmur of quiet conversations completed the atmosphere. Some tables were occupied, but there was a vacant one near the window, a perfect spot to watch the rain and get lost in thought. Gabriel walked over, his mind already drifting, planning how he would spend the next few days in his self-imposed exile. He was so absorbed in his own world that he didn't notice the small figure observing him intently from the corner of the room. A little girl sitting in a high chair with a drawing pad and a box of crayons stopped what she was doing. Her eyes, large and a surprising blue, followed Gabriel's every step. She dropped the red crayon onto the paper and with surprising agility climbed down from the chair. Her short, silent steps led her to his table. Gabriel, already seated, had pulled his phone from his pocket, a conditioned reflex, a search for a distraction to prevent him from thinking. He only noticed her presence when a child's voice, clear and firm, cut through the ambient noise. "Mister, are you lost?" The question was simple, yet laden with a depth that disarmed him. He looked up from the device, surprised. The girl gazed at him with an intensity rare for a child who couldn't have been more than 4 years old. Her eyes, such a clear blue they seemed like 2 windows to a summer sky, searched for something in his face. Her blonde, curly hair fell over her shoulders, and she held a teddy bear in one hand. Gabriel was speechless for an instant. The question echoed in his mind. Lost? Yes, he was lost. More lost than he had ever been in his entire life. In that moment, Time around them seemed to suspend. The sound of the rain, the conversations, the music, everything faded. He stared at her, trying to understand the reason for that question, for that instant and inexplicable connection. Before he could formulate a response, a sharp, violent sound broke the spell. The crash of glass shattering on the floor echoed throughout the room, causing everyone in the cafe to turn in the same direction. A woman, holding a tray with cups and a teapot, had dropped everything. She stood static, pale as wax, her eyes fixed on him. Gabriel recognized her instantly. Time can change faces, add lines of expression and weariness, but eyes remain the same, and that gaze he would never forget. Olivia Adams. The name flashed through his mind like lightning, bringing with it an avalanche of sensations he thought were buried forever. It had been 15 years since he last saw her, but her image was etched in his memory. Olivia had been his only point of peace during the most turbulent period of his youth. They met at university, at a time when Gabriel still dreamed of freedom, before being swallowed by the expectations of his father, a ruthless magnate from whom he inherited the surname and an overwhelming pressure to follow in his footsteps. Olivia was the opposite of his world. She was light, intelligent, with an artistic sensibility that made her see beauty in the simplest things. Her laughter, he remembered, had the power to dispel any dark cloud. Between economics classes he detested and literature classes she loved, between long coffees and impromptu campus meetings, they built something real, something beautiful, though dangerously brief. The end was abrupt. His father, discovering the romance he considered a proletarian distraction, arranged his transfer to a prestigious university abroad in London. It was, he said, the definitive opportunity for Gabriel to take his place in the family empire. He left. There was no fight, no broken promises, just a silent and painful farewell at the airport, a last embrace that promised everything and nothing at the same time. Then came the years of distance, incessant work, meteoric rise, and a marriage of convenience to a partner's daughter, an agreement that solidified his position in the business world, but which never had a soul. Now there she was amidst the porcelain shards, in a rainy coffee shop in Charleston, South Carolina. The reunion was a shock, but the reaction of the little girl, who still looked at him with those unmistakable blue eyes, awakened something even deeper, a suspicion that hit him almost physically. The child's eyes, they were his eyes. The same color, the same shape, the same intensity. The coincidence was so improbable that it disturbed him, making his heart race in a way that wasn't just surprise. It was panic and a strange, terrifying hope. Olivia finally moved. With trembling hands, she knelt to gather the shards, avoiding his gaze. A co-worker rushed to help her. She murmured apologies, feigning a normalcy that her pallor and stiff movements belied. She cleaned up the mess with the efficiency of someone desperately needing a task to hide everything she felt. Gabriel remained seated, paralyzed. He didn't insist, didn't confront her. What could he say? Hi, Olivia. After 15 years of silence, this adorable little girl with my eyes is my daughter. The idea was absurd, cinematic. He decided to wait. In the following days, the coffee shop became his refuge and his observation post. He spent his mornings there, under the pretext that he needed a quiet place to work. He opened his laptop, pretended to read emails and reports, but his eyes and attention were always on her and on the little girl. The girl's name was Clara. She was a force of nature. Spontaneous, creative, talkative, she ran through the coffee shop as if it were her kingdom, chatted with regular customers, drew fantastic worlds in her notebook. And Gabriel observed, piecing together a puzzle he wasn't even sure existed. He noticed the way Clara furrowed her brow when concentrating on a drawing, an exact mirror of what he saw in his own reflection every morning while shaving. He noticed the way she gesticulated with her hands when telling a story, and unmistakably his habit. These were small details, insignificant to anyone else, but to him they were like lighthouses in the darkness. The confirmation came innocently from Clara's own mouth. One morning, as Gabriel was drinking his coffee, she approached his table, curious about his computer screen. They started a trivial conversation about drawings and colors. Then, casually, she pointed to an old photo Gabriel used as a screensaver, a photo of him from his university days, and said, "You look like the man in the picture Mummy keeps in her drawer." Gabriel felt a chill. "What picture, Clara?" he asked, his voice lower than usual. "The picture she keeps hidden. Mommy looks at it when she thinks no one's watching. She gets sad when she looks," the girl replied with the brutal sincerity of children, before being called by Olivia and running back to the counter. Gabriel remained silent, his heart pounding in his chest. The pieces were fitting together, forming an image that was both wonderful and terrifying. He looked at Olivia, who had her back to him, preparing an order. Around her neck, hanging from a thin silver chain, was a small sun pendant, a gift he had given her on her last birthday before he left. She still wore it. After all these years, after everything, she still wore it. The bond between mother and daughter was evident, a symbiosis of love and complicity. But the complete absence of any paternal reference in Clara's life was a deafening silence. In the days that followed, Gabriel tried to get closer. He bought sweets for Clara, praised her drawings, initiated short and cautious conversations with Olivia, who responded with monosyllables, always polite but distant, maintaining an invisible barrier between them. She acted as if he were just another customer, a passing tourist. But her eyes, when she thought he wasn't looking, told another story. There was hurt, fear, and something more, something he couldn't decipher. The drama unfolding in that small coffee shop in Charleston, South Carolina, was more complex and real than any corporate crisis he had ever faced. His entire life, his certainties, everything was being rewritten by a 4-year-old girl with his eyes and a woman he should never have left behind. The rain that had brought him there seemed to have washed away not only the town's streets, but also the facade he had built over the years, leaving him exposed, vulnerable, and, for the first time in a long time, desperately in need of answers. The real storm, he was beginning to realize, wasn't outside, but within him, and it was just beginning. He was no longer the CEO in control. He was just a man, lost, facing the most important consequence of his life. One afternoon, the sky over Charleston, South Carolina, broke open again. A torrential rain, accompanied by strong winds, sent the few tourists scrambling for shelter. The coffee shop, usually quiet, became a bustling refuge. Gabriel was at his usual table, pretending to work, when he noticed Clara wasn't as energetic as usual. She was quiet in her corner, her head resting on the table, her face flushed. Olivia approached her, touched her forehead, and her expression shifted from concern to alarm. Clara began to complain of dizziness and chills. Her fever was high. Olivia, visibly worried, decided she needed to take her daughter to the town hospital. She grabbed her bag in a hurry, wrapped the girl in a coat, and prepared to face the storm. Gabriel stood up instantly. "I'll take you," he said, his voice firm, leaving no room for refusal. "My car is right nearby. It's faster and safer than looking for a taxi in this rain." Olivia hesitated for a second, her eyes locked in an internal battle. Pride and fear fought against the urgent need to help her daughter. Finally, a mother's concern won. She nodded, a minimal and almost imperceptible gesture. Gabriel didn't hesitate. He quickly guided them outside, shielding Clara with his own jacket, and drove them to the hospital. The waiting room was small and cold. The smell of disinfectant hung in the air. Clara was seen quickly and taken to an examination room. Olivia paced back and forth, her face a mask of anxiety. Gabriel remained by her side, a silent pillar of support. He had never felt so helpless. After an hour that seemed like an eternity, a doctor appeared. He explained that Clara's symptoms were concerning, and that they needed to perform a series of more complex tests to reach an accurate diagnosis. To expedite the process and rule out some genetic conditions, we would need some information about the biological father's medical history, the doctor said, looking from Olivia to Gabriel, assuming the obvious. The silence that followed was heavy, laden with years of unspoken words. Olivia grew even paler, if that were possible. Her eyes filled with tears. The lack of data, the absence of a father, was now delaying her daughter's treatment. The reality of the situation hit her with the force of a punch. It was then that she looked at Gabriel, a look that was a mixture of desperation, plea, and surrender. Pressed by the emergency, by the paralyzing fear of losing what was most precious to her in the world, and by Gabriel's distressed gaze, which seemed to share her pain, she finally let the truth come out. Her voice was a whisper, almost inaudible, but to Gabriel it sounded like an explosion. "He's the father." She pointed to Gabriel. "Clara is your daughter. The news fell upon him like an avalanche, burying everything he thought he knew about his life. The world spun. The hospital's white walls seemed to close in on him. But the feeling that overwhelmed him was not anger or betrayal. It was an overwhelming guilt, a deep pain for a time he could never recover. He had lost the first 4 years of his daughter's life. The first steps, the first words, the nightly cries, the drawings on the wall, the birthday parties. All of it had happened without him. He was a father who didn't know he existed, a ghost in his own daughter's life. The revelation hung in the air between them, irrevocable and transformative, while in a nearby room the little girl who united them slept, oblivious to the earthquake that had just shaken her parents' world. The future was a blank page, frightening and uncertain. But one thing was certain: nothing, absolutely nothing, would be as it was before. The doctor, oblivious to the drama he had just ignited, accepted the information professionally. He asked Gabriel some questions about his family history, questions about illnesses and conditions that, until that moment, were merely abstract data on a health insurance form. Now each answer carried an existential weight. It was information that could help heal his daughter. His daughter. The word echoed in his mind, surreal, and at the same time, the only thing that made sense in the entire universe. As he answered, Olivia remained silent, her arms crossed as if trying to shield herself from the world. Her gaze was fixed on the corridor leading to Clara's room, but it was a gaze that saw through walls, lost in 15 years of memories and solitary decisions. When the doctor left, a dense and uncomfortable silence settled between them. Gabriel was the first to break it. "Why?" he asked, his voice hoarse, laden with a pain that went beyond accusation. "Why did you never tell me, Olivia?" She finally faced him, and the eyes that once sparkled with dreams and passion were now clouded with exhaustion and hurt. "I tried," she said, her voice fragile yet firm. "I swear I tried. When I found out, you had already been in London for almost 2 months. The world was different. The ease of today didn't exist. I sent emails to the address you gave me. I sent letters, too, to the university address. I never got a reply." Gabriel frowned, genuine confusion on his face. He remembered that period as a blur of intense studies and overwhelming pressure from his father. "I never received anything. Emails, letters, nothing. My father controlled everything back then, my accounts, my correspondence. He would do anything to keep us apart." The suspicion that his own father had intercepted the messages, that he had deliberately built the wall of silence between them, was a terrible and entirely plausible possibility. Olivia sighed, a tired sound from someone who had replayed that story 1,000 times in her mind. "I don't know what happened. I only know that weeks turned into months. And then a mutual friend sent me a magazine clipping, a social column. It announced your engagement to Sophia Blackwood. Your photo was huge, the perfect corporate couple." She paused, swallowing hard. "What did you want me to do, Gabriel? Show up pregnant, knocking on the door of your mansion, ruining the millionaire deal your marriage represented, turn our daughter into a scandal, a footnote in your success story? I assumed you had moved on, that you had made your choice. And I made mine. I decided to protect Clara. I decided she would have a life of peace, far from a world that would certainly reject her. She would be mine, and that would be enough." Every word was a knife in Gabriel's chest. He couldn't blame her. From her perspective, he had abandoned her, married someone else. He represented everything she feared, a world of appearances, of coldness, where a youthful love and an unexpected daughter would have no place. He listened in silence, guilt consuming him. There were no excuses, no way to go back in time. The only thing that mattered now was the present and the future. And the future was sleeping in a hospital room a few feet away from them. The following hours were slow torture. Fortunately, Clara's diagnosis arrived and was less severe than feared. A strong viral infection complicated by a high fever, which would only require observation and medication. The relief was immense, a wave that broke the tension and allowed them to breathe for the first time in hours. Gabriel didn't leave their side. He arranged a private room, spoke with the doctors, and made sure Olivia ate something. These were small practical gestures, the only way he found to begin exercising a fatherhood that had been denied to him. When Clara woke up, feverish but already a little more willing, she saw Gabriel sitting in an armchair beside her bed. She smiled, a weak smile. "Mister, you stayed here?" "Of course I did," he replied, his voice soft. I wasn't going to leave you alone. He approached and for the first time touched her face, pushing a strand of hair from her damp forehead. The contact was electric, an ancestral connection that shook him to his soul. There she was, his daughter, flesh of his flesh, a miracle he didn't know existed. In the following 2 days they spent at the hospital, a new and delicate routine was established. Gabriel arrived early and stayed late. He read stories to Clara, watched cartoons with her on the small TV in the room, and learned about her favorite characters. He discovered that she loved the color yellow, was afraid of thunder, and that her favorite food was macaroni and cheese. Small revelations that for him were priceless treasures. Olivia observed this rapprochement with a mixture of joy and apprehension, seeing her daughter happy, enchanted with this man who, despite being a stranger, dedicated such complete attention to her, warmed her heart. But fear was a constant companion. What would happen when Clara was discharged? Would Gabriel return to his life in New York City, to his empire, and leave them with an even bigger hole than before? Was he just being kind, driven by the guilt of the moment, or was this real? She protected herself, maintaining a polite distance, treating him as a benefactor, not as her daughter's father. But it was a facade increasingly difficult to sustain. When Clara was finally discharged, Gabriel drove them back to the small rented apartment Olivia occupied above the coffee shop. The place was simple but cozy, full of colors and Clara's drawings scattered across the walls. It was a world built by her, a sanctuary of peace. Gabriel felt like an intruder. As he dropped them off at the door, an awkward silence settled. Olivia's thank you sounded too formal. His you're welcome inadequate. It was time for goodbye, the end of that crisis bubble that had united them. He should get in the car and go back to his life. But he couldn't. I'm not leaving, he said suddenly, more to himself than to her. I'm going to stay in Charleston, South Carolina. For a while. Olivia looked at him, surprised. Stay? Why? You have a company to run, a life. My life is here now, he interrupted her, and for the first time his eyes didn't show the cold CEO, but the passionate young man she had known at university. I lost 4 years, Olivia. I won't lose another day. I'll rent a place nearby. I want to get to know my daughter. I want her to know me. The declaration left her speechless. Part of her wanted to believe, wanted to surrender to the hope that this fairy tale could be real. But the other part, the part that had learned to protect itself, screamed that it was madness. Gabriel kept his word. The next day he rented a small house on the same street, a few yards from the coffee shop. His presence in Charleston, South Carolina, ceased to be that of a tourist and became that of a resident. And with that, the dynamic between them changed. With each dawn he grew closer to Clara. He learned her gestures, her stories, her favorite songs. He discovered she had his same stubbornness, the same way of tilting her head when she was curious. He spent his mornings at the coffee shop, no longer as a distant customer, but discreetly helping out. He unloaded boxes of supplies, fixed a loose shelf, entertained Clara when Olivia was busy. The other employees and regular customers looked on with curiosity. But in a small town like Charleston, people soon grew accustomed to the presence of that elegant man who seemed strangely devoted to the coffee shop owner and her daughter. In the afternoons, he and Clara had their own rituals. They walked through the cobblestone streets, him teaching her to jump over puddles. They went to the pier, watched the colorful boats, and he told her invented stories of pirates and hidden treasures. They bought ice cream and sat in the square, talking about everything and nothing. The bond between them grew effortlessly, natural and strong, as if time and blood were desperate to compensate for what was lost. Clara, with the purity of children, accepted him completely. To her he was the coffee shop mister who became her best friend, and now her mother had explained to her in simple words that he was her father. The word Dad left her lips for the first time on a sunny afternoon as they built a sandcastle on Pontal Beach. Dad, pass me the blue bucket. Gabriel froze. The word so simple hit him with the force of a revelation. He looked at her blue eyes sparkling under the sun, and felt tears welling up. He smiled, a trembling, genuine smile. Of course, sweetie. As Gabriel and Clara's relationship blossomed, Olivia remained in an emotional limbo. She saw her daughter's happiness, the way her eyes sparkled whenever Gabriel appeared, and that was all a mother could want. But her own heart was in turmoil. Gabriel's constant presence reopened old wounds and awakened feelings she had fought hard to bury. She found herself observing him from afar, the way he laughed with Clara, the patience he had to answer all her whys. He was the man she had loved, but also the man who had left her. How to reconcile these two truths? He spoke of staying, but for how long? His life was elsewhere, a place of power, of wealth, of an ex-wife who certainly wouldn't be happy to discover the existence of a child born out of wedlock. She knew he had a public image, a reputation to uphold. She was afraid of being seen as a mistake, a stumble in the path of a man destined for success. The fear that sooner or later he would leave again, and this time it wouldn't just be her heart he took, but also her daughter's. This anxiety kept her distant, cautious. At night, when Clara slept and silence filled the small apartment, Olivia found herself haunted by the ghosts of the past and the fears of the future. She wanted to trust, wanted to believe that this new beginning was possible, but 15 years of solitude and self-sufficiency had built high walls around her heart. And she didn't know if Gabriel or even she would have enough strength to tear them down. The past, she knew, doesn't disappear so easily, and there were secrets and pains that his mere presence couldn't heal. The decision to leave, to flee that unsustainable situation, began to mature silently in her heart, a seed of panic growing with each passing day. Time in Charleston, South Carolina, seemed to run at a different pace, a slower, more deliberate rhythm, dictated by the sea and the fine rain that came and went. Weeks turned into a month, and Gabriel's presence became part of the landscape. He had indefinitely postponed his return to New York City, delegating responsibilities, conducting video meetings from his small rented house, to the surprise and astonishment of his board of directors. The empire he had built with such dedication suddenly seemed distant, an echo of another life that no longer belonged to him. Real life was there, in the smell of coffee in the morning, in Clara's colorful drawings, in the sound of her laughter echoing through the cobblestone streets. But if for Gabriel and Clara that new reality was a field of happy discoveries, for Olivia it was a minefield. She lived in a constant state of alert, her heart divided. On one hand, Clara's happiness was undeniable and contagious. Her daughter was blossoming under her father's attention, asking questions about his family, about her grandparents, building a history that hadn't existed before. On the other hand, every gesture from Gabriel, every lingering look, every conversation that stretched into the night after Clara slept, was another step into territory she didn't feel safe exploring. She remembered the idealistic young man he had been, but saw the powerful man he had become, and she constantly wondered if those two could coexist. She was afraid of getting used to that happiness, of letting her guard down only for reality to come knocking and take everything away again. The precariousness of the situation consumed her. That arrangement couldn't last forever. His world would call him back, and she and Clara would become, at best, a sweet memory of a rainy summer in Charleston, South Carolina. The turning point came from where it was least expected, through a ghost from the past. One day, Gabriel received a call from an unknown number. It was Richard, an old university colleague, a mutual friend he and Olivia had back then. Richard had become a renowned architect, and by coincidence was in Charleston, South Carolina, to supervise the restoration of a historic mansion. He learned of Gabriel's presence in town through an acquaintance and decided to call. They arranged to meet for coffee. The reunion was cordial, full of reminiscences of college days. They talked about their careers, about the turns life took. Then, in the middle of the conversation, Richard's expression grew serious. "Gabriel, there's something I need to give you. Actually, something I should have given you 15 years ago." Gabriel's curiosity was piqued. Richard rummaged in his briefcase and pulled out an envelope yellowed with age. The paper was fragile, and the address was written in a familiar handwriting, Olivia's. The recipient was him at his dormitory address in London. "Olivia gave me this a few weeks after you left," Richard explained, his voice low, almost apologetic. "She asked me to deliver it to you personally, as I had a trip planned to Europe the following month. She said it was important that she didn't trust the mail. But my trip was cancelled, family problems. I tried to call you, email you, but your contacts no longer worked. It was as if you had disappeared off the map. I kept the letter, always thinking that one day we would meet and I could finally fulfill my promise. Over time, life happened, and it remained stored at the bottom of a box. Until today, Gabriel took the envelope with trembling hands. The weight of those 15 years seemed concentrated in that small piece of paper. He thanked Richard, his mind spinning, and quickly said goodbye. He returned to his rented house, feeling his heart beat erratically in his chest. He sat on the porch with the sound of the sea in the background, and with almost surgical care opened the envelope. The letter was dated 3 months after his departure. The blue ink was a little faded, but the words were clear, laden with an emotion that transcended time and hit him squarely. "My dearest Gabriel," it began, "I write this letter not knowing if it will ever reach you. The silence that has settled between us since you left is the loudest thing I have ever heard. Each day without news from you is a small eternity. I try to convince myself that you are just busy, immersed in this new world your father built for you. But my heart, stubborn, fears that the silence is an answer I don't know if I'm prepared to hear. But I need to be brave now, braver than I've ever been, for I am no longer alone. Gabriel within me grows a part of us. I found out 2 weeks ago. I am pregnant." The first feeling was panic, a chilling fear that paralyzed every part of my body. I am alone, I am young, and the man I love is across the ocean, perhaps no longer even remembers me. But then amidst the fear I felt a small flame of joy. A little piece of our love, of our time together, is here with me. It is real, and it is the most precious thing I have. I am not writing to demand anything from you, nor to disrupt your plans. I am writing because you have the right to know. I am writing because in my sweetest fantasies, I imagine you coming back, the 3 of us building something of our own, far from everything and everyone. I write in the hope that your silence is merely distance and not forgetfulness. Please give me a sign, any sign. Say that you received this letter. Say that you know. I will be here waiting. Always yours, Olivia. Gabriel read the letter once, twice, 10 times. Tears streamed down his face without him realizing it. The pain described in those lines, the loneliness, Olivia's fragile hope, all of it devastated him. His absence was not the result of calculated neglect, as guilt made him believe, but of a web of silences, of his father's manipulations, of a cruel fate that had driven them apart. He wasn't just an absent father due to ignorance. He was the lost hope of a frightened young woman who loved him. He realized the extent of her strength. Olivia waited for him, and in the absence of a reply she didn't crumble. She picked herself up alone and built a world for their daughter. She protected her, loved her doubly, to compensate for the father who wasn't there. That night, the image he had of Olivia transformed. She wasn't just the woman he had loved and lost. She was a hero. With the letter in hand, he crossed the street and knocked on her door. It was late. Clara was asleep. Olivia opened the door, surprised to see him there, his face streaked with tears. "What happened?" she asked, concern in her voice. Without saying a word, he handed her the yellowed envelope. She recognized it immediately. The air left her lungs. She looked from the letter to his face, panic growing in her eyes. "Where? How did you—" "Richard. He's in town. He kept this for 15 years. She recoiled a step as if she had been struck. Her last defense, the last wall protecting her, had fallen. Now he knew everything. Not only that he was a father, but that she had sought him, that she had waited for him, that she had dreamed of a life together. The vulnerability left her exposed. "Gabriel, You don't need to say anything," he interrupted her, his voice choked. "I read it, and I am so sorry for not being there. So sorry for your pain, for your loneliness, so sorry for everything." He took a step forward, closing the distance between them. "But you need to know one thing. I never forgot you, Olivia. Not for a single day. And if I had known, if I had received this letter, I would have dropped everything. I would have come back on the first plane. My father's empire, the expectations, none of that would matter. The only thing that mattered was you. And now it's the 2 of you." The intensity in his voice, the sincerity in his eyes was undeniable. But for Olivia, it only made everything more complicated. The letter's revelation brought not relief, but an even greater weight. Now his presence was no longer a choice. It seemed an obligation. He was there driven by guilt, by the duty to rectify a past mistake. And she didn't want to be a duty. She didn't want her daughter to be an obligation. She knew his life was structured, that he had a reputation, an ex-wife, an entire world that had no room for a coffee shop owner and a daughter who suddenly appeared. She was afraid of being seen as a mistake, a blemish on his perfect biography. And could love, if it still existed, survive so much weight, so much complication? The decision that had been silently maturing within her now screamed. She needed to leave. She needed to protect herself, and especially Clara, from the pain of a new goodbye which she felt was inevitable. She needed to find a place where they could just be themselves, without the shadow of such a grand past and such an uncertain future. In the following days, Olivia became even more reclusive. She was polite with Gabriel, but distant, creating a chasm between them whenever he tried to approach her more intimately. He felt the change but didn't understand. He had opened his heart, shown her the truth, but she seemed to be closing herself off even more. While Gabriel focused on repairing the past, Olivia secretly planned her escape from the future. One night, after putting Clara to bed, she began to pack her bags. She did everything in silence, her heart heavy. She folded her daughter's small clothes, put away her favorite toys. Each object was a memory, a pang of pain. She looked out the window and saw the light on in Gabriel's house. He was probably working or perhaps thinking about her. The idea of causing him more pain was unbearable, but the idea of staying and hurting herself even more was terrifying. Clara, who should have been sleeping, appeared at the bedroom door, sleepy, rubbing her eyes. She saw the large suitcase open beside her mother's bed. "Mommy, are we going on a trip?" The innocent question hit Olivia with the force of a punch. How to explain to her daughter that they were running away from her own father? Olivia knelt, forcing a smile. "It's a surprise, my love. We're going to see a new place." But Clara didn't smile back. Her blue eyes, so much like Gabriel's, gazed at her with a seriousness that belied her age. She held her mother's hand, her small hand squeezing tightly. "But I don't want to go. I want to stay here, with Daddy." Clara's words, spoken with the simplicity and force of an absolute truth, were like an anchor that stopped Olivia's fleeing ship. She looked at her daughter, at those eyes that were a mirror of his, and saw not just a childish wish but a deep need. The need to have a father, to have roots, to belong. In her desperate attempt to protect her daughter from pain, she was about to snatch away the greatest joy she had ever known. The house of cards that was her resolution collapsed. She hugged the girl tightly, her face buried in the blonde curls, and cried. She cried for the loneliness of the past years, for the fear of the future, and for the overwhelming love she felt for that little person who, with a single sentence, had shown her the way. She unpacked her suitcase that night, putting each piece of clothing back in its place, an act of surrender and at the same time of courage. But fear doesn't disappear with a decision. It hides in the shadows, waiting for a moment of weakness. And dawn brought with it the sunlight and the clarity of doubt. What was she doing? Trusting a man who belonged to a world so different from hers. The image of him leaving inevitably came back to haunt her. Panic, irrational and powerful, seized her again. Driven by an impulse she herself didn't understand, she made a drastic decision. She wouldn't flee forever, but she needed distance. She needed a place to think, away from his eyes, away from the pressure of that situation. Before the day fully broke, she woke Clara, dressed her, and, leaving a vague note on the kitchen table saying that they needed some time, got in the car and drove out of Charleston, South Carolina, without a definite destination. When Gabriel, as he did every morning, went to the coffee shop for breakfast and didn't find them, he felt a pang in his chest. The place was closed, which was unusual. He knocked on the apartment door, called for Olivia, for Clara. Silence was the only reply. He went around, used the spare key Olivia had given him for emergencies, and entered. The apartment was tidy but empty, too empty. Then he saw the note. "We need some time to think. Don't look for us." The words were sharp knives. The ground seemed to vanish beneath his feet. History was repeating itself. He was losing them again. A cold despair seized him. He ran outside, got into his car, and began driving through the streets of Charleston, South Carolina. Aimlessly, his heart pounding against his ribs. He searched every corner, every beach, every place he had visited with Clara. He looked at the face of every little girl, hoping to see her blonde curls. Nothing. They had disappeared. The morning sun began to warm, but Gabriel felt a winter chill in his soul. He pulled the car over, his head resting on the steering wheel, trying to think. Where would she go? Where does one flee when running from oneself? He closed his eyes, forcing his mind back in time, to their university days, to the essence of who Olivia was. She wasn't impulsive. Her actions, even the most drastic, had an emotional logic. She wouldn't go just anywhere. She would go to a place that meant something, a refuge, and then, like a flash, the memory came. A place only theirs, a secret from their youth. The hidden garden behind the old College of Humanities, in the city where they had met. It was a small, forgotten Eden, with a wooden bench under a golden trumpet tree, where they spent hours talking, dreaming of a future that never happened. It was a crazy gamble, a shot in the dark. She could be anywhere in the United States, but it was the only clue his heart gave him. Without hesitation, he turned around and hit the road, driving for hours, his foot heavy on the accelerator, hope and fear battling in his chest. With every mile, the corporate world, the meetings, the profits, everything dissolved into insignificance. He remembered the day his father had told him that a man's legacy was measured by the size of his empire. What a lie! He was realizing, in the pain of that potential loss, that his true legacy wasn't in his company's annual reports or in economic columns. It was in the blue eyes of a curious little girl, and in the strength of a woman who, even though hurt by him, had never completely forgotten him. That pursuit was no longer about mending the past. It was about fighting for the only future that mattered. Arriving at the university town in the middle of the afternoon, he didn't go to a hotel, didn't stop to rest. He went straight to the campus. It had changed with new buildings and more activity, but the old College of Humanities building was still there, covered in ivy. He parked haphazardly and ran, his heart in his throat. He passed the building and found the small hidden trail, almost overgrown. And there, at the end of the trail, was the garden. The golden trumpet tree was in bloom, a carpet of gold on the ground. And sitting on the wooden bench was Olivia. She was looking at the horizon, her face tired. A few yards from her, Clara played among the flowers, oblivious to the drama, happy in her own world. The scene was of such profound, perfect peace that he stopped, afraid to break the spell. Olivia heard him approach and turned around. The surprise on her face was quickly replaced by an exhausted resignation. She had nowhere left to run. He walked slowly towards her and sat beside her on the bench. There were no accusations, no anger, just the silence and the sound of the breeze in the golden trumpet tree's leaves. "How did you find me?" she asked, her voice a whisper. "I never truly lost you, Olivia," he replied, looking at Clara. "A part of me always knew where you were." He turned to her, his eyes filled with a certainty he had never felt before. "I understand your fear. I understand why you ran. You think I'll leave, that my life is somewhere else. And you're right, my life was somewhere else. But it isn't anymore. That wasn't life. It was a performance. I spent the last 15 years building a house of cards, and all it took was one breath, the breath of your existence and Clara's existence, to bring it all down. And I'm grateful for that." He took her hand. It was cold. "I'm not here out of guilt or obligation. I'm here because for the first time in my adult life, I know exactly where I want to be. The decision we need to make isn't about rekindling a love that was interrupted. It's about finally embracing what already exists, what has always existed, even at a distance. A family. My legacy isn't a company, Olivia. My legacy is her," he said, looking at Clara, who was now running towards them with a yellow flower in her hand. "And it's you." Clara handed the flower to Olivia and then hugged Gabriel's neck. "So you found us, Daddy?" "I'll always find you," he said, his voice choked, kissing the top of her head. Olivia looked at that scene, at the man who had crossed the state guided by a memory, and at her daughter who smiled, secure in her father's arms. And the walls she had built with so much effort around her heart finally came down, not with a crash, but with the quietness of surrender. She allowed herself for the first time in a long time to believe. The future was still uncertain. There would be challenges, difficult conversations, worlds to reconcile. But there, under the golden trumpet tree of their youth, with his family reunited, Gabriel Davis knew with absolute clarity that he had finally found his way home. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Gabriel, Olivia, and little Clara has moved you. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories about reunions and second chances. Find it here. Just click on the card that appears on the screen. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give the video a like. Every day we bring unique narratives that explore the complexity of life and the heart. Don't miss our upcoming content. And of course, we want to know your opinion. Do you think Olivia took too long to tell the truth? We await your comment.